as long as I'm doing all these other things. Well, every Christmas, I go home to spend a few weeks with the family. And historically, I still did the Whoop, the chronometer, the eating the certain things. I said no to grandma's apple pie and mom's homemade this and that. But this last year, I said, I'm gonna live a little. I live a little. And instead of doing all of those things, I was up late. I had Christmas lights on in my room. I didn't have my blue light blocking glasses on. I had variance in my bed and wake times. I didn't really hit the gym as much. I didn't go on walks because it's cold in Virginia at least around Christmas, and I'd rather be dead than cold. And basically, I left everything that I do in my normal routine that makes me feel good, and I just abandoned it for 3 weeks. It sounds like a recipe for a disaster, right? But instead, and despite these dangerous deviations, #alliteration, I found I felt better than when I was in my routine. Now, I'm not suggesting that routines and biohacking are out of place. And I'm not suggesting you go out of here and chain smoke 4 packs of cigarettes until you're coughing up a lung like an old cat and a hairball across the living room floor. But what I'm suggesting is that perhaps if we become too myopic, too neurotic, and too excessive, that it actually has a diminishing return or a counterproductive return. Because the common denominator with me, when I got back to Austin, as I analyzed those 3 weeks versus the 3 years prior, was I was just low stress. It's the only difference. Even though I wasn't doing all those things I normally do during my routine, I was so low stress that my body had a chance to bounce back. And our bodies are extremely efficient at recovering if you give them the space to do it. So, part of managing stress when it comes to experimenting is being okay with the unknown. Because we've got an infinite puzzle, right? It's a lot of pieces. If we believe that we have to solve this infinite puzzle, what kind of stress does that put on us, right? If you have a health concern, if you're struggling, or maybe there's someone you love who's struggling, and you put that on yourself, like, I single-handedly have to make you better, what kind of stress does that put on you? Maybe it's more about what can we do that's reasonable within the framework of being a holistic, healthy human. So, that is precisely why stress mitigation is the free space on the bingo board. What bingo board, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. The third and final analogy is bingo. Before I get to that, I missed a part. My client just a few weeks ago said this to me, and I really want to talk about that with stress before I forget. He said this phrase, and maybe some of you have heard it: don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Have you heard that? Show of hands. I don't know where I've been. Under a rock, I guess. But that's a great phrase, and I think that really sums up. I probably should have just said that versus doing the whole previous slide, huh? But don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I love that. If I'm not already beating a dead horse, I'm about to. Picture Bob Ross delicately repainting all those puzzle pieces who used to be poker cards into a bingo board, where each health idea that you could experiment has a number and a square associated with it. Achieving bingo in this metaphor means that you acquire insights to truth and health. But it requires that you cross off some of these squares. You place those bingo chips. So when you experiment firsthand, you're essentially taking a health idea, you're experimenting, and then you get to place the chip. And whether or not it helped you get the bingo in the end, you're still crossing spaces off the board. So experimenting with ultimately what doesn't serve you in the end still serves you. It's like a diet elimination diet, if that makes sense. But you can do it for all things, not just diets. So stress, where does that come into play here? It is the free space on the bingo board. That's how important it is. And that's why we spent so much time on it on the previous slide. If you are not using a bingo chip on the free space, you're missing out. It is in the center of the board. It is most likely to be used, and it could impact your ability to actually make breakthroughs when it comes to your health and your understanding of health. In the framework we reviewed, I paraphrased this action thing. It's a quote from Wolfgang Van Goethe. I don't even know who that is. It sounds like a punk rock singer or something like that. Evidently, it was a guy from, anyhow. He says, doubt can only be removed by action. And I really, really like that sentiment. Because if we take action, we remove doubt, we place those bingo chips, and we use that free space. All right, folks, we are getting towards the grand finale. So what in the world did we learn? Outside the fact that I used too many analogies, had a very cheesy presentation style, and things along those lines. Oh, before we do that, you can reinstate all of your preconceived notions and biases about health now, because I want them to hear this last part. Right, can you? Yeah, no, come Thanks, John. You can just discard the nothing. We don't have a use for it anymore. So, each layer of understanding that we peel back reveals another layer of health that we didn't even know existed. This reshapes everything that we thought we knew, so we need to be open to that. It's like an endless onion, or roots of a tree that you're trying to uncover. As you go through it, there's always something. You pull something else, it branches out in another direction. And it brings forth new questions, which isn't a bad thing. Our perspective and everyone else's perspective around us is partial truths, right? Not right and wrong, but partial insights. So view them that way. Each of us, regardless of our conviction, and it's good to have conviction, is navigating an imperfect path when it comes to health. All of us, even the big names here at this conference. This is why it's so crucial to have the mindset of a true scientist. This childlike curiosity that gets you excited about experimenting and discovering versus being bogged down by how in the world does anything work? How in the world am I supposed to solve health? Solve my health or those around me that I care about. Phrases like become your own doctor is a phrase that I love, but without the mindset of a true scientist, you can't actually do that for yourself. So you have to open up a little bit. No matter who you are hearing it from, take everything with a grain of salt. Preferably Redmond's Real Salt or another low micro brand you're choosing affiliated. But a grain of salt nonetheless. If you're after momentum, always be experimenting. It is the best way to actually unlock truth in this really convoluted, deceptive world. The moment that you think you've got it all figured out is the moment that you are ignorant of the truths that are hiding just around the corner. And one last thing before the last slide. I'm not sold that if we're not growing, we're dying. We hear this a lot in business, in everything in life. I think stasis is real, and I think that's where stress management comes into play. It's okay to hit the pause button. All right, we boil everything I just said to 3 takeaways. Partial truths, puzzle pieces. No one is right, no one is wrong, everyone is partially true. Focus on uncovering hidden gems. Shift those puzzle pieces. Take bets on the hands that resonate with your experience, your situation, and your intuition. Number 2, always be experimenting. Embrace the mindset of a true scientist and have that childlike curiosity. It'll give you energy in a time where you may be lacking some. Number 3, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You do not have to sacrifice the things that are important to you to get knowledge, to become healthier, to help those around you. These ideas are not mutually exclusive. Now, Bates, what do we do with these takeaways? I want you, each of you, to experiment voraciously and endlessly, like I mentioned before, on everything. What you believe to be true right now, what I'm telling you today, and what anyone tells you to do anywhere, anytime. Just experiment until you keel over. Then you can rest. And the desired outcome for all of us in this room, I might be projecting, but is to be as healthy as we can, not only for us, but for those around us. And I truly believe we can make the world a better place if we do that. But it's not easy. And it's, Zane said this yesterday. You have to find your why, and the experimenting in health is a lot more than just for you. It's for your community and those that depend on you. I know that last bit sounded churlishly cliche, but at my ripe old age of 32, I'm finding out that cliches more often than not are very true. And that rhymed like a Dr. Seuss book. That's my style, so let me cook. I do not take it lightly to have had your undivided attention today, each and every one of you. Thank you very much. That concludes my presentation. good time?
10 minutes.
Perfect. All right. We're doing questions now, which is honestly the best part. I don't know what the last 40 minutes was really about. So if we're not connected, come up to me after the presentation, find me at the conference, connect with me here. I'd love to nerd out about stuff. I would like to hear about what experiments you're doing or what qualms or challenges or resonances happen with the presentation. But for now, let's do some questions. Who has questions about this or really anything else? I'm an open book and I'm ready. I'm biased, I guess. But yes.
So which diets have you done? And then when reverse dieting, what are like what do you suggest to cut out or to start?
It's a good two-parter. I did not pay her to say that. But she knows I don't like talking about myself a lot. So it's good that you brought the diet thing. Thanks. I have tried keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian, fruitarian, animal-based, and some forms of all of those. And I've done each of those diets for a period of 6 to 12 months, very religiously. And actually, that's part of what got me the job at Heart and Soy, is that I tried all these things, and I tried animal-based. And I was following Paul Saladino's work, and I felt better than all of those other experiments. And I think the second part was how I would suggest a reverse diet.
Yeah, or like, but is there a common, like, specific type of foods that people have the most problems with, typically, that you should start cutting out?
Yeah, I think there's a way to parse that out even, because cutting out the right foods is very much like there's a gradient, right? No one really has an adverse reaction to high quality meat. And then fruits is a little more of a risk there. It's individual. And then as you go up to, like onions, garlic, other things, that increases. So I always suggest that people, it's a classic elimination diet, right? Go back to what you know is least likely to harm you and start to add things in and test. But about reverse dieting, that's where we want to boost our metabolism after chronic dieting. So the pro-metabolic movement, I told you that my experiment was kind of having this forbidden love child between animal-based diets and pro-metabolic diet. That is essentially for reverse dieting. That's where we up intake for calories and sometimes carbohydrates too over a period of time, because people have been chronically dieting. They have issues with their thyroid function, with their hormones, with their body composition, with their sleep quality, all kinds of things. And they think that, like, let's say your basal metabolic rate is 1,800 calories a day. I was talking about this in a talk earlier for those of you who were there for that. And let's say that you have a caloric deficit of 300 calories, so you're eating 1,500 calories a day. If you do that week over week, your metabolism acclimates. You don't stay at a BMR of 1,800 calories, and this is why it gets really hard to burn fat. What happens there? Your body triages its efforts. So all the peripheral functions that are all the things that you need to look good and feel good, it shuts down because it's concerned about surviving. It's concerned about survival. So what I would say for reverse dieting is slowly increase calories, because a lot of people, whether it's just eating different macros or eating in general, they like my analogies in my transitions, they like to give you this roller coaster whiplash effect versus this slow acclimation, this incremental progression. So I would suggest for people who have been chronic dieting and plateaued with weight loss to incrementally increase calories at a very slow rate over time. Does that answer your questions? Yeah.
What was your consensus on the pro-metabolic animal-based?
That's a great question. My lifts were way better, and my performance in the soccer pitch and the volleyball court were way better. Oh my gosh, I just realized I forgot something. I never gave you the second example with that framework. I went strict carnivore after I did that experiment, because I tried all those diets that Courtney just brought up with her question, and I was like, Robert Sykes is actually just down the hall, another panel. He's a keto savage carnivore bodybuilder coach. So he's a real big proponent of that kind of a diet and lifestyle. And I was on this podcast, we talked about all the diets. I was like, I'm surprised you haven't tried carnivore, which is a really good point, because if you look at people's, not that there's like an inherent natural evolution, typically they start at like paleo, or rather vegan, vegetarian, they move to paleo, then they go carnivore, and then they go animal-based. And I kind of skipped that phase. And I was like, oh, well, that would be really neat. I should try that. 7 days into it, I felt like ass. And not like peach emoji ass either, like plumber cracked ass. And so it was infringing on my non-negotiables, right? But this high carb thing, because I was already metabolic healthy and I was already very active, I felt really good eating more carbohydrates. But I did notice that my energy was a little more inconsistent. And I know there might be reasons to that. But my general consensus from that experiment was I felt good at higher carb, but I also kind of missed the fats too. And I haven't really parsed out why. So I actually have 2 or 3 more experiments that I want to do on myself to continue to figure that out.
So, off of this idea of experimentation, so you're at an event like this, you hear all these speakers with like different strategies and philosophies. It can be a lot to try to experiment with at the same time. So how do you think about, first kind of like dissecting what's causing what, so you can actually understand like which variables are at play here, so you're not testing too much, and then how would you think about prioritizing if there's like, you're hearing like 10 new things that could be amazing. How would you think about prioritizing experiments?
That's a really good question, and it can be a lot, right? There's, like, we will run out of time to experiment with everything we want to experiment before we perish. So, I guess prioritizing that comes back to the intuition and your experience, right? I would just always cross-reference ideas, like whether you write them all down or you have them in your Notion or you're just thinking about them. I would say, which one of these intuitively am I the most attracted to? And go with that one first. And you might be wrong sometimes, but I find that most of the time people's intuition is right. And I couldn't tell you why, I don't have the data, but just from talking with clients and working with people, if they're really confused about the array of possibilities, and I ask them, it's like, well, ignore all the science and what I'm telling you, anyone's telling you, what feels right? And they're like, well, I think this. It's like, let's go with that. Which makes my job easy as a coach, but most of the time, it actually works out really well for them. And I think that sometimes people are their own best medicine, and their compass, it's like putting a magnet around the compass, right? Like normally it works, but when you're overanalyzing things, it gets all jumbled and starts spinning. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So you're doing 3 to 4 months experiments?
A minimum.
Yeah. And how do you get rid of confounding factors that come in your life? And how do you make sure you got the right results? Because other life factors can change.
You've been asking great questions this whole weekend. I was prepared for this one. That's a really good question. I keep saying that, but it's true. I've been doing this for 14 years, and that doesn't mean that I know everything, but I think as you experiment, each year or each experiment, it helps you zone in on figuring out what's actually occurring versus what might be occurring. And so it's not necessarily knowing that anything is cut and dry, but it's about parsing it out through similar experiments. Like for an example, if I was doing 4 months of experiments with a high carb diet, and I was doing the same workout, right, these consistent variables, and I had a similar sleep schedule, similar level of stress, all these things, but I only tweaked one thing, right, we're isolating this variable, then it's easier to identify. So kind of tying into Eli's question, I like to only experiment with 1 or 2 things at a time, because then if I only change 1 or 2 things, I know it has to do with those, logically. But as you mentioned, life it's not like we're a walking equation and we're like some sort of stick figure. Things are very dynamic, and there's a lot of curveballs that life throws at us. So we just have to do our best, because we honestly, just like the puzzle, we're never gonna know. So you have to have a little bit of faith, right? You have to have a little bit of faith in the conviction and the action you take with your experiments, and that's why we keep coming back to intuition. Because ultimately, and I'm a devil's advocate, so I love questioning myself. I'll be like, do you even know anything? Like, what are we doing today? But if intuitively you're like, no, that feels right, I think that's enough to go off of, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And what are the other experiments you're excited about doing soon?
You know, I've really been, after eating a ton of saturated fat, I've been really obsessed with experimenting under the animal-based umbrella with higher carbs. But I'm actually excited to revisit carnivore. I don't even know if I finished this story. Imagine being in my mind. 10 days into strict carnivore, I felt bad, and I actually threw in the towel, because when I was raw vegan, I was stubborn and I pushed through, and I remember how good that did not feel. And so I want to revisit carnivore at another time in my life where I'm not as active, right? Like I'm growing my own business as a solopreneur. I was moving, I was trying to live, to play soccer, volleyball, all these things. And so the higher carb intuitively felt good, and I think because I didn't take my own advice and I just dropped carbs to the floor and tried to force this experiment, I didn't give my body enough time to acclimate to the experiment. So I'm actually really excited to try carnivore, because it's one of the few ones that I believe in theory, but I haven't actually executed yet. So that would probably be the big one. Sir.
So would you say this philosophy of experimentation, applies equally as well to other areas of life, let's say dating or your career or even faith or something like that?
I love this.
Or are there certain arenas where you're like, no, these are absolute truths to hold on to in these arenas?
You should come give this talk next time, because if we had more time, that is exactly what I would want to talk about. This framework is parallel, and I believe in every realm of life, like business, like relationships, pretty much anything. I mean, in a world where we have so much information at our fingertips and so many opinions, we are all stuck in the state of research, of analysis paralysis. And I think we learn by doing a lot more than we learn by thinking. And it's not that we shouldn't ever think or reflect or analyze, but I think this Pareto distribution is flipped on its head. We should be doing, like I mentioned before, 80% doing and 20% reflection and research, not the other way around. And I think most people today are doing it the other way around. But yes, I could be wrong, but I think this is applicable in any realm of life. Yeah. We're going to time? Just kidding, we're not. I'll just say one more question. Yeah. I'll come talk to you in a minute. Thank you guys very much.